Hi, this is Carl Freder from C.R.O.M magazine. 2020 will be known for a lot of very bad things, but one great thing to come out of this year with little to no live activity is this plethora of music that was released. I expect that trend to continue into 2021, and as vaccine distribution ramps up finally, and with any luck, our favorite musicians can get back to doing what they love to do, which is putting on live events for us, the fans, and us, the journalists, and us, the photographers. This explosion of creativity that happened due to this lockdown this year is not only amazing for the fans, but for us journalists as well. However, I do confess that during the pandemic, my music listening took a huge nosedive, and for that, C.R.O.M was basically inactive since February. I am determined to reactivate my journalist side, even though this feels like the millionth time that I've said this in recent years. I simply don't want it to die because music is so important in my life. However, personal and work-related items have caused this sort of drag on my output. And I'll get little spurts of it for months and then it'll stop. I want to get to something that's a little more steady and reliable because I don't feel like I'm there or haven't gotten there anyway. I had decided a month ago that I wouldn't be doing this typical formal process of best of 2020. For me, it's a huge, long process where I go through every single album and I rank them and try to put them in categories and whittle them down. This year has had the most releases for me in the last 5 years. I've had over 720 albums that I've gotten, and sorting through them is really a huge deal. And it wasn't really fair for me to do that process without having put in the time that it takes to listen to these things, at least the way I do it. I mean, typically for reviews, I listen to an album a minimum of 10 times because I need to find angles and things that I might have missed. And I also want to see the staying power of releases and see how they last for multiple listens. Sometimes I'll listen to something and think it's great, and I find I don't pick it up again for the rest of the year. Some albums I'll listen to every day. So there's some staying power, and I like to weed through that to make sure that I'm right about what I'm saying and that I could look back at this 10 years from now, if I ever do, and say, you know what, I still agree with my review on that. So there's a reason I do it the way, but it's also very long, and it's fair to the artist, but it's a lot of time that I don't have. So I'm going to do something completely different again based on something I saw a friend of mine do recently. So I'm going to pick albums in no particular order, recommendations for various subgenres, and then an overall top 5. So I'll pick one out of each of these subgenres that I present, and then do an overall top 5 of everything. So there'll be at least a countdown of 5 releases. It's very hard when you do 720 and whittling down. So the purpose of this best of, for me, every year has been recommending albums and acknowledging those albums which surprised me, albums that need special recognition. They may not be in my top whatever, but they need to be talked about and they need to be put out there for the purpose of trying to promote them and help these bands get more recognition, and for you fans to find great albums. Because to me, the search for the great albums and the great bands and the great music is really the thing I love the most. It's trying to figure out, based on a bunch of different things that go in my head, album cover, label release, something I've been doing for 30 years, and also the description of the band, to kind of find these gems and tell people about them. So that is really this is the least I can do this year, if anything. If C.R.O.M has been inactive for all these months, I haven't had any review output or any article output on that or any other site. The least I can do is just make some recommendations to assist, especially since I've received all these albums and also purchased a huge ton of them as well. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it into subgenres, try to keep this short because I know these videos people tap out. So I'm going to try to keep it somewhat short with little explanations, and I'm going to do it based on recommendations that I have for albums, and I'm going to do things that I acknowledge that I haven't listened to, but I know that I will eventually like them based on the little I've heard. And I'm also going to do sort of my recommendations of the 5 or the candidates for the 5 in each category. I've combined some of these categories to make them a little easier. Typically, I divide them into much more specific categories, and that's based on how I listen to albums and what I end up going for that day. because my listening is mood based. So if I want something that's melodic death metal, I'll get that. But for purposes of this, I'm going to have two, for example, in death metal, I'm going to have two categories. One will be old school style and one will be melodic death metal, which will consist of all these other machinations of that within it for purposes of time. So you're going to see a lot of, you might see some Finnish melodic death metal. You might see some other type of melodic death metal, which is, something else I would categorize in differently and put separately. But for this purpose, I'm going to combine those categories to make it a little shorter. So without further ado, let's start with category number 1. So let's start with the traditional classic metal sound subgenre, so to speak. The metal that started metal, basically. The traditional style has seen a steady flow of new music and new bands since it was rediscovered or reimagined by younger musicians. Let me stress that I really hate the term new wave of traditional metal or new wave of true metal, only because it assumes that there was a death. Traditional metal has been around forever. The bands that have been doing it in the 80s are still doing it now. The only difference is there's so many more younger musicians that wish to sort of carry that mantle. And that speaks to my heart, truly, because it's kind of the base of what I love about metal. It's the thing I got into the first, obviously, back in the 80s. And then all the other subgenres came. So it's got a special place in my heart. You could draw the line, very thin line, between power metal and traditional metal, depending on how you view power metal, whether you view it as US style power metal, European style metal, whatever. It doesn't even matter. The other difference is, or the big difference between what's happening now as opposed to the 80s is the younger guys have the tools to make it sound so much better than the bands did in the 80s. The technology has gotten better. It's a little above my knowledge level, but I know it has. And there's this kind of wealth of pure material that was already there, which the younger generation sort of loved. And they mastered the musicianship of these guys and made it even better and a fresher take on the classic sound. That's a great thing, because what it does is it progresses. Sometimes it doesn't, but it does progress the sound a little bit more. You get to see that sound reimagined by younger musicians. Most people say, well, stop playing that because you're younger guys. You can't do it the way the older. No, it's bullshit. The younger guys do it sometimes better. And I actually enjoy hearing the younger musicians play it, as well as the older musicians do it in the same style that they always have, or even better. It's kind of pushing each other. The younger musicians are pushing the older guys to make slight changes, play better, have better production values, whatever it is. Maybe I'm out of line, but that's what it seems to me. And this kind of section will draw that out, what my point is on that. So now I'm going to mention some albums that came out this year that are sort of in this recommendation. They're not necessarily the ones I'm going to put forward in my top 5 of this particular subgenre, but I'm going to mention this. There's bands like California's Haunt, who released actually 2 new albums in 2020. Then you got Chicago's High Spirits, who released just another brilliant album called Hard to Stop. And then you got Spain's Night Fear, who dropped an amazing 3rd album called Apocalypse. And Finland's Satan's Fall, who just blew me away with their debut, Final Day. These are younger guys taking the mantle and running to the mountaintop with it. One of the bands that I just discovered this year that absolutely came out of left field for me, didn't know about them, even though they've been kicking around since 2015, is Norway's Whale. They put out a sophomore release this year called Civilization Maximus. It's almost as if you take the traditional style, infuse it with a little bit of Eclipse hard rock hooks, a little bit of Grand Magus style doom tinged riffs, and a real healthy dose of Iron Maiden. It doesn't sound like it's something new, of course. There's so many bands that have done that, but this one just blindsided me. I never knew what to expect. I looked at the cover. I love this, kind of the way I've been doing things for forever. I look at covers and I see them and I say, I think the band's going to sound like that. And they don't. They sound like something completely different. And when I saw this cover, I was thinking it just screamed like stoner hard rock, like style, just based on the way the cover painting looked. But it turned out that this was more like the traditional style on steroids, which was just, it blew me away. Still, it didn't make that top 5, only because there's so many albums that came out and so many impressive albums. It's very hard to put them in this kind of order. And even though I'm going to give you 5, I'm not putting them in 5. I'm not putting in 5 through 1. What I'm going to do is tell you who the winner is, in my opinion, of the 5 that I present, only because it's like splitting hairs, even with the bands that I'm mentioning now. Now, for fans of the virgin steel style that has been absolutely destroyed and decimated by whatever terrible experiment Dave DeFias is turning this great band, or once great band, into, will find amazing solace with the band Eternal Winter from Maryland. Their 2020 release, Archaic Lore Enshrined Songs of Savage Swords and Dark Mysticism, takes the best of Virgin Steel and Warlord and puts out this amazing record that I couldn't recommend anymore. Okay. Other albums that come highly recommended from me are Possessed Steel's Adris, Roadwolf, who put out an amazing, impressive debut called Unchain the Wolf. Incredible band that has a lot of hard rock in it, but very hooky and very memorable stuff. And then there's Japan's Satanica, and I'm not sure, I've heard people talk about this band, but when you look, this is another one of those bands, you look at the photo, you look at their photo, you look at their logo, you look at their album art, and it just screams that they're going to unleash a black metal assault on you. But instead, what they give you is this Merciful Fate style brilliance. It's wonderful riffs, incredible melody. The vocals are a bit of a drawback. They're not deathy, but not a great singer. But then again, traditional metal it doesn't always have a great singer. Sometimes it's a unique singer. Sometimes it's a singer that fits whatever style it is. Sometimes you just accept it. I don't always listen to the singer and go, oh my God, he doesn't sound like Bruce Dickinson in his glory days, or Rob Halford in his glory days. It doesn't matter. As you'll see from the top 5, some of the bands in there don't have a particularly amazing vocalist, but he's so unique that if he ever got taken away from the band, it would be highly noticeable and very disappointing, I might add. Now, there's some honorable mentions that I'm going to mention. That if I did like a top 15 or a top 10, these bands would most likely be in there. You got Wolf, my friend Simon, who put out a new Wolf album, Feeding the Machine, incredible Swedish band that's sort of power traditional, more traditional, I think, on this album than ever. And you got Gravedigger from Germany, the legendary Gravedigger, who went back to the Scottish material again, for lyrical material, the history of Scotland, with Fields of Blood. Very good album. Iron Angel, who has been a favorite of mine since the 80s. They're certainly not the Winds of War Iron Angel sound that you once had, but they're still putting out incredible albums since they've come back, including this new one, Emerald Eyes. Burning Witches from Switzerland put out an album that's probably the best of their career. I think this third or fourth, probably their third, all-female band. Not that matters, but incredible stuff, incredible musicianship, really cool riffs, and I love female vocalists who could best the guy in the respect of being like metal. Not so much this kind of operatic style, which I do love, but I've gotten sick of over the years. I like the women who actually could just kick the guy's ass in regular traditional classic metal, and this is one of those bands, Burning Witches. Not a lot of people talk about them. Their last album was okay. This is more like their first one. Really great stuff. Clovenhoof. Here's a band that comes, another band from the new wave of British heavy metal way back when, who refined their style and got a little heavier, a little more power. They put out and they've been releasing albums almost every year for a long time now since they've returned. And this new one, Age of Steel, is incredible. Another UK band. Then you got Tyrant. There's so many Tyrants, but this is the one from California, who's been around forever. Both they and the German Tyrant have always been my favorite of the Tyrant names. But this actually has Robert Lowe, who used to sing for Candlemass and Solitude Aeternus, at the helm of their new album, Hereafter. Really good album. Thrust, another band who's come back. You remember Posers Will Die? Thrust came back, and they've been putting out albums pretty consistently for a number of years now. And they put out another new album a new album this year that's been incredible. Another Chicago metal band. That Chicago metal scene has just been incredible for many, many years, and they always have a solid scene with amazing bands. And Thrust's new album, Helm of Awe, is in that category. Great band that you need to check out. And then there's Switzerland's Megaton Sword. This kind of epic style again, more like the Warlords and the Virgin Steels, and also the Eternal. You'll see in another couple of bands I'm going to talk about. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. They put out an album called Blood Hails Steel, Steel Hails Fire. Highly recommended. Incredible stuff. Now let's get into my top 5 or my 5 picks for this particular genre. You got Armored Saint, who put out Punching the Sky. I'm not sure why I wasn't expecting what I had actually heard with the new Armored Saint. I kind of live under this weird fear that whenever Armored Saint wants to release an album, that those prog influences are going to become bigger and bigger and overshadow the band's traditional sort of core and turn them into sort of Fate's Warning, with that 2 very distinctive eras where you could tell the difference between the John Arch era and the other era. So I call it the other era because the John Arch era is my favorite. Nothing against anything put out after, but that's just in this case, Fate's Warning. That's where I fall. So every time the band Armored Saint exceeds these expectations, I'm not sure whether I'm just lowering the bar when I hear it, and I'm saying, it's Armored Saint. It could be hit or miss with me. And every time they put out an album, it's always good, including the new ones. So when they put out this first single, the first single that came out at end of the attention span was a video and a single. It was kind of sprung out of nowhere, and I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. And then ditto for the next one, which is Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. John Bush is just one of the most amazing vocals. He has a very unique, gritty style, very unmistakable. You know who it is as soon as he sings. But I mean, I don't know what it is with Armored Saint, but I sort of fall into these bad habits. I don't want to be that version of myself from way back when, where I was just like, the first 2 albums are the only good albums the band has ever released. And that was my mentality in the sort of the 90s, especially when grunge came around and I was still avid into, and the 90s put out great music, don't get me wrong, but I was still stuck in the 80s even then. But I had to get out of that mode towards the end of the 90s and into 2004. I started accepting so much different styles. But with Armored Saint, for some reason, I jumped back into that mentality where I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be as good as Delirious Nomad or March of the Saint. And it never sounds like it, because you can't expect them to do that, because bands grow up, they change their styles, they add new influences. As long as the songwriting is strong, everything else will fall into place. So this is what happens with Armored Saint. So I start listening to songs like Lone Wolf and Missile to Gun and Do Wrong to None. And the band brings that same classic energy with those newer influences, subtle and sometimes not so subtle. What an incredibly enjoyable album. Highly recommended. And I want to sound like I'm surprised every time. I actually was. But then when I realized that this happens every time, I'm really not that surprised. So it's Armored Saint. What would you expect? Then there's Ambush, who put out the album Infidel this year. Sweden's Ambush with Infidel sees this kind of brilliant traditional metal act continuing these kind of strong, hooky songwriting. You'll hear a lot of people that are very good friends of mine say this, and I'll join them in this. The hooks are what make everything. The melodies, the hooks, the choruses, anything to make it more memorable. To me, memorability is number one, because I'm a fan. I'm not a musician. So I can't play anything. I don't know how to write music. I just know how it makes me feel. And so when there's hooks that draw me in and things that I can sing and things I can remember instantaneously, it always gets a higher level. And it's not so much that the musicianship is so great or the band is so great. Some of the worst bands, at least in my opinion, the worst bands I've ever heard, leave an impression on me where I remember what they sound like. Now, it doesn't make them any better, but that memorability is a huge deal for me, because I like to remember things, especially when you listen to so many thousands of records. I mean, I have 23,000 records over the years. And so this has been like, this is just another cog in that wheel that you need to do something to set yourself apart. Ambush has this style of very hooky songwriting. They kind of wrap the ancient, and I mean ancient, style of Def Leppard and sort of circa 80 to 82 Maiden, that spirit and that driving riffs that, and they fit it so wonderfully inside of these speedy and not so speedy riffs, depending on the song. And it makes the tracks like Hellbiter, A Silent Killer, The Demon Within, The Iron Helm of War, excuse me, among the best on the album. Now, I know people fawn over Swedish bands, and I'm actually guilty of that, just because I know no matter what style of metal it is, the Swedes always try to keep that spirit, those influences, the style, what they want to sound like. They make it their own by making it better. And this is something kind of unique to them. I don't get that sense from a lot of other countries, and I'm not elevating them or making them be so great, but they have a unique way of doing it. Whenever I see, that band's from Sweden, I'm definitely going to check them out, because I know that if it's a traditional metal band, it's going to have that traditional metal style that I like, and they will try to do it as true to the style, but true to themselves as they can. It's a very unique quality. So it doesn't matter what style it is, even if it's black metal, I still want to check it out, because it'll be something that has a greater than 50%, 60% chance that I'm going to say, wow. And so I really do take the Swedish bands very seriously when I'm looking for that new band, or that band I haven't heard, or that style that I think is going to be great. Now you got Eternal Champion. I was sort of almost blurted this out before. Eternal Champion's Ravening Iron. This band's from Texas. They dropped a ton of traditional perfection with this absolutely instantaneous classic Ravening Iron. And you could bask in this sort of brilliant riffage and haunting and soaring but monotonal vocals of Jason Tarpley. There's songs like Skull Seeker and Face in the Glare that just drip with absolute perfection, and just makes me feel like that future of that proud classic style of metal, that epic style of metal, is secure with these younger bands. This is just a crushing, epic, and very, shall I say, tasty record. It's incredible. You definitely have to check out Eternal Champions, Ravening Iron, and pretty much their entire catalog. It's really incredible. Raven, again, I'm friends with John Gallagher, and I'm proud that I was a massive fan of this band before I even met John. John is an incredibly amazing person. And I had the opportunity to see him on 70,000 Tons of Metal multiple times, and he always stops and has a chat with me. They're just incredible guys. I even got some photos of mine in on their last album, actually. And they're back, and they just keep getting better. Age be damned. They infused this new drummer, Mike Heller, who's been in the band now since 2018, and he just showed his younger and way, way heavier background, death metal-y kind of background, and brought this into Raven and infused them with a lot more energy, making them much, much heavier than they've ever been. I don't remember hearing, outside of Architect of Fear, I don't remember hearing this band as fierce, but this is like Architect of Fear and way beyond. I've never heard them this fierce, this heavy, this energetic, and they've been energetic most of the time. Even when those classic Raven elements surface, and there's tons of them on this album, they have this heavier edge to them. This kind of quintessential blade in the refreshed Raven arsenal can be seen perfectly in the song Human Race. And Human Race is just, I was listening and I'm like, holy shit, are those blast beats? I've never heard that in a Raven song. Incredible stuff. This is a Raven for a new generation, and I just applaud these guys for being just not only being great, but getting better and better, more catchy, finding more ways to make it slightly different, and slightly better, and slightly, this album was mind blowing, and I've been blown by Raven almost every album, especially in the recent albums as they get better and better, compared to even the days when I love them on the classic releases. I think they're better than ever. So you definitely need to check out Metal City and Sirathungal, and I will call them Sirathungal only because that's the way I grew up. But obviously you can call them Kirathungal. I don't mean to copy my friend Dario, but it is one of those names that people get a little picky about how you say it. But anyway, I call them Sirathungal. Sirathungal came back after many, many years, mostly to play live events, with the playing classic material in live settings in recent years. So as a Sirathungal fan who came from the time when like One Foot in Hell was released in 1986, it was really heartbreaking when these guys broke up after 91. and when Paradise Lost came out. But when they returned, they put out, it seemed like it was going to be just for live. Then they put out a new single called Witch's Game, when I was like, holy shit, this band's got a lot left in the tank. And so this was sort of the precursor to then the full length release, which came out this year, called Forever Black. And it was like there was a time capsule that somebody had dug up, and found like unreleased material from the 80s with a much better sound. And obviously all that we loved about Sirathungal, if you do love them, returned with this kind of youthful vigor and renewed power. Tim Baker's, I was talking before about vocalists and not being, great, not necessarily having to be great vocalists on a technical level. Tim Baker's got a very unique style, and it's a very acquired taste. Most people hear it and they think, this guy's awful, I can't listen to this, it's very grating. But fans of Sirathungal can't have it any other way. If he's not in the band, it's not Sirathungal. This isn't just saying I like the early stuff. This would change the band completely. They might as well change their name. It's just, his style is so unique, and if you haven't heard it, you need to check it out. You could start with this album because it could be blended with any of their classic releases. It's that good. But he was it's as if he was bottled up and just unsheathed from the 80s on this new album. This album also doubles as the comeback of the year. I'm not doing that as a category, but really is the comeback of the year, along with Hitman. If you're familiar with New York's Hitman, they put out a new album this year, and that album is fantastic. But I'll get into that in a different category. So now, who's the winner of these 5 that I went into with a little more detail? And of course, if it wasn't clear already, Sirathungal's Forever Black is definitely the best of the lot in the traditional classic style. And for a year where many traditional classic bands were released new albums, and so many EPs that I didn't even mention because EPs aren't part of this, there are so many bands that are bringing back that style or playing that style, and it's just like hard rock. It's just so many different bands and so many different albums, and the difference between them is a hair. They're so great, and it's a style that if you grew up listening to it or you got listening to it based on newer, younger bands, it doesn't matter. I said the style is something that's the core of my very existence, and just seeing this many bands do it and perform it well, and putting out these kind of classic releases in 2020. I mean, metal will never die. So now let's move on to the next category.